Jermod McCoy and David Sanders Jr. are generating more individual hype for different reasons this offseason than anybody else for Tennessee football, and that includes new transfer quarterback Joey Aguilar. Jermod McCoy is by far Tennessee's most high-profile returning starter, and David Sanders is Tennessee's most high-profile commitment who is expected to start immediately. This is bolstered by a couple of recent lists that have come out this week. Jermod McCoy was on the list of the top 50 first-round draft prospects for 2026, the top 50 NFL draft prospects to watch for this season. He came in at number 12, which would make him a first-round draft prospect. He right now is considered the 12th best NFL draft prospect entering this season. It's earned. Jermod McCoy was a lockdown cornerback last year, completely changed everything about Tennessee football's defense that had not been there Tim Banks' first 3 years as defensive coordinator. He was an Oregon State transfer that Josh Heupel hit a home run by going to pick up Josh Heupel, Tim Banks, and Willie Martinez. Meanwhile, David Sanders Jr. was ranked on the list of top 10 impact freshmen entering 2025. That was late last week. Now, I'm just going to say what was written about both of them. Jermod McCoy, and I encourage you guys to read this. Josh Edwards of CBS Sports ranked the top 50 prospects. What he wrote about Jermod McCoy was, quote, McCoy was a Texas regional qualifier in the triple jump back in high school. The one-time Oregon State transfer had 4 interceptions last season. That's as far as he went. McCoy deserved a little bit more respect. However, Michael Cohen of Fox Sports, when discussing David Sanders as a top 10 impact freshman, says Tennessee flashed both its recruiting chops and its NIL prowess by successfully staving off more than 36 suitors to secure Sanders' signature last December. A summer filled with official visits to Nebraska, Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, and Tennessee gave way to a verbal pledge from Sanders to the Volunteers shortly before the season opener. There was a significant late push from the Buckeyes in mid-November that left many Tennessee fans nervous about potentially losing the crown jewel in head coach Josh Heupel's class, especially when Sanders visited Ohio State again for a high-profile showdown with Indiana. But Sanders' commitment lasted into the early signing period when he officially put pen to paper and anchored a class that finished number 11 nationally and number 8 in the SEC. This represented a massive recruiting victory for Heupel, who added his third 5-star signee of the last 2 classes alongside edge rusher Jordan Ross and wide receiver Mike Matthews in 2024. Sanders is the 4th best recruit to ever sign with the Volunteers, behind running back Bryce Brown, defensive back Eric Berry, and quarterback Nico Iamaleava. Boy, that's a big bust since 2 of those 3 transferred. The commercialized nature of modern college football means landing a player of Sanders' quality comes at a significant price, with one source reportedly telling On 3 in February that he was the highest paid recruit in the cycle. Accurate or not, such publicity never hurts in the eyes of future recruits, even if that kind of investment attached lofty expectations to Sanders from the moment he arrived on campus. Sanders, who played left tackle in high school, began spring practice by cross-training at both tackle positions before settling on the right side in March. He could be a day one starter when the Volunteers open against Syracuse on August the 30th. So, today's tough question, and it's the poll question, is this: what is more likely to happen this year? David Sanders earns freshman All-American honors, or Jermod McCoy plays like a first-round NFL draft pick. Now, we know David Sanders is going to be plugged in right there at right tackle and start. He is one of those rare players that could probably start as a freshman. I think they're going all in on that. That's evidenced by Larry Johnson entering the transfer portal. What's holding David Sanders back a little bit is that Tennessee has to replace its entire interior line. Now, David Sanders will be starting opposite Lance Hurd at left tackle, but on the interior, they have to replace Cooper Mays, Javontes Praga, and Andre Carrick. They've got 2 transfers, Sam Pendleton and Wendell Moe Jr., but they also have William Satterwhite, Max Anderson entering into the rotation as well. So there's going to be kind of a fight for the 3 starters in that. David Sanders will have to deal with lots of inexperience that, one, he has, but also the interior linemen playing that are supposed to help him out will have. So there will be some serious growing pains. At the same time, Jermod McCoy tore his ACL in January, and he's not going to be 100% in September, hence the reason Tennessee went for Colorado transfer Colton Hood. They have Ricky Gibson III. They had to pay him to stay, knowing his value. And so there's debates about Jermod McCoy, even though he's got insane talent and will have more experience this year. So both have potential, both have drawbacks. What's more likely? I'm leaning David Sanders, freshman All-American. And here's why. There's more leeway for freshman All-American. You're allowed to struggle in September and be a freshman All-American down the road. You struggle in September, though, as an experienced player, it's much harder to play your way into being a first-round draft pick the next year in the NFL draft. And I think Jermod McCoy is going to have trouble specifically because of that ACL tear. No one's going to, if David Sanders has a rough September, solid October, and a strong November, he'll be freshman All-American. If Jermod McCoy has a rough September, solid October, strong November, NFL scouts are going to be very concerned about what happened in September and October. So I'm leaning it's more likely David Sanders is a freshman All-American. Today's tough question brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney. Play to win. Why settle? Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com.
The poll question is up. What is more likely? David Sanders is a freshman All-American. Jermod McCoy plays like a first-rounder. Man, it is close. 53% say Sanders freshman All-American. 47% say Jermod McCoy plays like a first-rounder. That's at 17 votes. When it was at 16 votes, it was a 50-50 split. So it's a very, very, very close call. Look, I understand the concerns of Nico Iamaleava and Bryce Brown. Tennessee, with high-profile recruits like this, has missed. We just saw what they said. Nico Iamaleava, Bryce Brown, and Eric Berry were the only three more highly rated recruits. Iamaleava and Brown both transferred after 1 year of playing with, well, Iamaleava transferred after 2 years with Tennessee, only 1 year started. Bryce Brown transferred after just 1 year with Tennessee. Both were total bust. And I actually think consensus across the board, David Sanders is more highly rated than Nico Iamaleava, believe it or not. And I actually think he was more highly rated than Bryce Brown. I could be wrong on Bryce Brown, but I'm pretty sure he was more highly rated than Nico Iamaleava. Then there's Eric Berry, who started as a freshman and was a freshman All-American, and then should have won the Thorpe Award, but was an All-American as a sophomore, and then did win the Thorpe Award as a junior. He won the Thorpe Award as a junior because people felt he deserved it as a sophomore, honestly. That was not even a race that year. One of the best players of all time for Tennessee football. David Sanders has that level of potential. And for those saying he's a freshman, he's going to have trouble starting. Remember, Wanye Morris and Darnell Wright both started as offensive tackles for Tennessee, Jeremy Pruitt's second year in 2019. And Darnell Wright was a 4-year starter and was amazing his last year, played his way into a top 10 draft pick in 2022. David Sanders has that potential. Darnell Wright was also a 5-star. David Sanders was more highly touted universally than Darnell Wright was coming out of high school. That's how good David Sanders is. So I'm leaning David Sanders being a freshman All-American is more likely than Jermod McCoy playing like a first-rounder, because we don't even know if Jermod McCoy is going to play in September because of that ACL tear. We're pretty sure David Sanders is going to be locked in as the starter at right tackle, given the fact that Larry Johnson III entered the transfer portal. So when you take that into account, I'm going to go David Sanders. Now, I want to get to some of the message board points, because there's a debate over whether or not David Sanders or Nico Iamaleava was a more highly rated recruit. Iamaleava was more highly rated on some services, but David Sanders was a universal 5-star. That's where I'm landing. Okay, David Sanders was a universal 5-star, and I think that because of that, Nico wasn't actually a 5-star across all ratings. So when you take that into account, I would give David Sanders the edge as a more highly touted prospect than Nico Iamaleava. And yes, when you take things into account on that, Nico Iamaleava, I'm sorry, man. I'm leaning pretty heavily on David Sanders being a more impact player than, let's just say, than Jermod McCoy as a first-round draft pick. And for those who say he was a consensus 5-star, Nico Iamaleava, no, he wasn't. Nico Iamaleava Now, you can criticize their ratings, but he was a 4-star on ESPN. His scout grade was an 89 on ESPN. He was a 4-star on ESPN. Now, ESPN is the least credible recruiting service out there. They're the ones you least value. For it's ESPN, On3, Rivals, and 247. ESPN is the one people value the least, but you take a little bit from it. To give it to a religious context, when you talk about the Gospels, when ancient historians try to study the Gospels for history perspective, there's Matthew, Mark, and Luke they study legitimately. They hardly study John because John is so much more spiritual speaking than it is from a historical perspective. ESPN is the John of the recruiting services. I know that's a weird comparison I gave right there, but that's what ESPN is. It's the one you rely on least, but it still counts. And he was a 4-star on that, whereas David Sanders was a 5-star across the board. But we're not comparing David Sanders to Nico. We're comparing David Sanders to Jermod McCoy. And I think David Sanders will be a bigger impact player than Jermod McCoy.